Well, that's a great question. I think one way that we can solve that is having a benchmark reporting, showing intentionality. You can pretend, but you will be exposed. And exactly like the way I mentioned, if you are an SME or an institution where you claim to have a robust ESMS, you have development partners walking to your shop and engaging you to see how robust you are. And largely, you tend to send that, well, most of them are ticking a box. And sometimes you have an approach to unearth whether indeed they have a robust system. And we do that a lot during our onboarding. We require our partners to not just have a system that exists, but also we go there to test their robustness and how intentional they are. And not only leaving them, we also be monitoring, we also issue out a commitment plan that we want them to be at a point where if, let's say, we go and they're at 60%, we help them over a 1-year period to bring them up to an arm's length approach, where then we could also provide additional support. So, I mean, my consideration is that if you don't have it embedded, you will be exposed and you may not attract the right development partners to work with you.
All right, so, I mean, once you embed it, it will be clear that you are on the journey. And I think from what you are saying, measurements, benchmarking and all that helps to solve that problem. Do you want to contribute to it?
Just to add to that, so there are standards. So particularly if you're looking at compliance, you have the global reporting initiatives. If you are also into typical sustainability, just as we have in cocoa, there are several standards, that's Rainforest Alliance, Fair Trade, that you can comply with and to be able to prove to the market and the industry that you are actually achieving the needed KPIs. And beyond this, we also have the third-party assurance service. So having financial institutions like KPMG and the likes also coming in to conduct an assurance audit and providing a certificate to your customers globally, also provide that level of assurance, credibility that you need to be able to speak about what we've been able to achieve. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so the assurance part is very important. Okay, Mr. Lamte, do you want to add a few words to that?
So for us, what we see in terms of greenwashing is the fact that we have tried to prevent our economy from experiencing that kind of arrangement. And how we have done that is to come up with a carbon market infrastructure or framework that provides how you can actually create carbon assets or assets in Ghana that really have environmental integrity at the core of them to meet international standards. And that is what we have done the whole of it this year.
Okay, thank you. So I think over the years, when we talk about ESG, we hear a lot about the environment aspects, climate change, the challenges we have, and then even the social aspects, people talking about diversity and inclusion, gender equity, fair pay, equal wage, I mean, and all that. But we tend not to hear a lot about the G. The G. I mean, we hear most about the E and then the S, but the G sometimes seems to be missing. What's your thought about that? And what do you think? How relevant is the G also in today's conversation about ESG? John.
Great question. I think I like the G aspect because that is where you have a lot of lip service and approach. So I think we should approach it in this way. I believe that governance has to do with what sort of structures do you have to ensure that at the senior management level, even the entire operations, you have embedded this framework. For instance, when we talk about governance, we talk about reporting, we talk about the situation of the function. Who is accountable? Who is responsible? What sort of reporting requirements do you give to your development partners? What sort of benchmarks, as my colleague mentioned, you have the GRI, you have the World Bank performance standards, you have the IFC performance standards, and how are you screening and also making sure that these are embedded? Because the G is basically how do we put the governance structures around the environmental social management system, or as some banks will call it, the risk management framework of the environmental and social. Now, beyond that, at the end of the day, the question is that why are we having the system is that we want to impact. And in leveraging or scaling impact, you need to make the system scale up into the business that you do. You need to start measuring, having a metrics whereby you say, this is where we are today, and in next 3 years, we want to improve our rating. And having a standardized reporting and a standardized metrics is something that I think across the world, we are trying to find out what one standard do we use to say that in KPMG, you are a 4-star or a 5-star institution. In DBG, we want to be from a 4-star to a 5-star. That governance and reporting and the entire structure, as well as positioning the function, is very critical. Because I believe in having interface with a lot of banks and also consulted for very companies, I realized that if you don't have a senior management or the CEO buy-in, you will not succeed and be able to scale as fast as you can. And this is what I think that it has to be pronounced. For instance, the assurance and having Ghana Ghana Sustainable Banking Principles by the Bank of Ghana is a good start to have, whereby it provides a reporting tool whereby financial institutions are supposed to report back to the regulator on how they are internalizing this entirety, and also being able to show that they are not just ticking a box, but being intentional about it.
Thank you. Ernest.
I would say implementing ESG starts with the gene. I gave a typical experiential knowledge within 2 ton, where we had to change our entire leadership structure and putting in there somebody who is an expert when it comes to sustainability, an expert when it comes to ESG. And of all decision-making point, he contributes to that. So for any company to actively adopt and take advantage of the moving world means that you have to get somebody to be part of the process. Not just somebody responsible who doesn't have the knowledge, but you are responsible. It's different. You need to be able to get someone who will have the full understanding, apply the different standards, and be able to catalyze the needed benefits that the company needs.
So the message that is coming out clearly is that the gene is very important because it's the anchor that holds the other two. And it brings some level of accountability and making sure that we are achieving whatever we set to ourselves for the E and then the S. Now, Mr. Lamte, I would want us to go technical a bit to understand the carbon market. What really is the carbon market and what it has to do with climate change. And recently, I think you had a program where you spoke about a lot of the things that you are doing. Can you just educate us here on what the carbon market is about and what relationship it has with climate change and what government is doing in this space? Thank you.
Hello? Okay, great. I'll first start by saying that climate change or emissions presents cost, meaning that climate change presents risk that we must build resilience against or reduce to reduce our emissions. And so if you want to take a look at carbon market, it simply is looking at the cost associated with emissions. If I mention emissions, I mean greenhouse gas emissions that predominantly exist in the environment, such as water vapor, methane, carbon dioxide. These are gases that exist in the atmosphere, but due to our development trajectory, they have increased. And these gases are able to retain heat and reduce them over time. And that is what causes the warming of the globe. So in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, we are looking at how do you come up with pricing instruments that will change the behavior of industry, of developers to ensure that they reduce their carbon footprint or emissions. And so you price the cost to make sure that they reduce their emission. And in terms of that, we have 2 options. We have the compliance side and the voluntary side. And in terms of the compliance side, it's a heavily regulated market where government comes up with a regulation or an association comes up with a regulation that seeks to drive the emission reduction activities that it has assigned itself to. So, for example, you hear of carbon tax. So, carbon tax simply is a tax that is placed on emissions per ton of CO2, if you say per ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. So, all these gases are expressed in the form of, or in carbon dioxide equivalent, so to ensure that they are comparable. And so that is the market. And the voluntary side looks at a B2B arrangement where I can come together with KPMG, implement a carbon offset program, and then use that to meet my reporting obligation. Okay, thank you.
You are making me a geography student this morning. Yeah. So it's very important in terms of the calculations. I mean, what models do you use? And for businesses, what do we have to do? What do we have to do to make sure that we comply with these initiatives that you are rolling out?
Okay, great. So there are a lot of reporting standards that we find credible, and or international standards or crediting schemes that come up with methodologies for calculating your emissions or your carbon footprint. So these standards, we have actually come up with those that we recognize in Ghana, because we want to ensure that they are high environmental integrity standards, so that we do not suffer the greenwashing that you spoke about. Again, in terms of the standards, after developing the standard, we also have come up with what we call accrediting entities. So meaning that we want to also play a role in terms of the auditors, such as KPMG or verifiers or validators, who would come and ensure that indeed the methodology that was used to calculate the emission per the activity or per the corporate body's emissions meets the standard. Again, we are also available to support any corporate institution or anybody that is seeking to actually come up or understand their carbon footprint. And I must say that we have helped VRA to do that, and now VRA is now a consultant now helping VACO to actually come up with their carbon footprint, because now, as you rightly said, to enable VACO export its aluminium, now they must make sure that they have the carbon footprint attached to it to be able to come up with a premium price attached to their product. So it is not really just about a laborious tax or we're seeing this as additional, but it is more important for your survival and to make sure that your businesses become resilient in the near future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I like one thing that he said. When it comes to ESG, it's not really about the hard things that you do, but the small things you do. So, for example, as an institution, KPMG, we decided to do a working from home arrangement. I mean, so many years, a few months before COVID struck, right? And what we found out is that just by asking our staff to work from home, you have significant of them not driving their cars and parking their cars at home, and that helps even for us to know how much we are contributing in that space to reduce our carbon footprints in the market. So I'm happy that you have mentioned this, that you actually have a way of measuring that, and you have helped VRA to do that. And as we do these things, I think it will all go to help us to manage our footprints, carbon footprints on the market. Now coming back to you, John. One other thing that we hear a lot about in ESG is sustainable financing. I want you to educate us on what impact sustainable financing has on driving investment, especially FDI, into the country.
Thank you. Hello? Okay. Yeah. So thank you, Gordon. So, like the way I rightly mentioned, how we have positioned the role, ESG, sustainability, and climate financing, which is more of sustainable financing, is that we have a lot of billions of dollars in the owned by development partners and financiers. We need to start moving the money to Ghana. And how do we do that? Is by first embedding these systems in place first and getting ready for financing. And I can tell you that if you don't have these systems in there, you will not get funded from any development partner. And that is so cut. And God, you know that. So what we are doing is that, first of all, to enable us to mobilize these funding, we first of all have to design a facility, a vehicle, which DBG, we are currently getting ready to finalize, DBG Climate Financing Facility. So this is a facility that is like your green financing line, whereby we are working with our PFIs, our banks that we have onboarded, to look at a DBG green taxonomy. So this is not your normal buzzword, but it's basically saying we have a list of eligible green projects. What we're going to do is that we are working with the PFIs, look through your portfolio, or look through your pipelines. Let's identify these SMEs who are into renewable energy, energy efficiency, waste to energy, recycling, and let's see how we can reduce low emissions in the country, as well as position for climate resilience. So, and for the private sector, not the public sector. So we are doing this by socializing with them and come up with pipelines. With these pipelines, we can be able to raise and mobilize this amount of billions from the international market. And so that it will be able to position and scale and promote businesses who are into renewable energy. And beyond that, we are not just looking at climate financing. In the coming years too, we'll be looking into biodiversity financing. So these two are one of the key vehicles and instruments that are being mobilized with funding from the international market. And we want to deploy them to Ghana at a concessionary rate where we deploy through to SMEs so that they could scale these businesses that are reducing greenhouse gases and also for climate adaptation projects. So these are some of the climate sustainable financing. And also there's another bit of it which is somehow losing out, but at DBG we want to scale it up a bit. It's called gender financing, whereby we mobilize funding for women-owned and women-led businesses. In DBG, we've earmarked 10% of our funding for women-owned and women-led businesses. So have we earmarked almost about 100 million Ghana cedis for climate mitigation and adaptation projects. So these are some of the sustainable finance instruments that are available that banks and financial institutions could tap into leverage to their businesses in Ghana.
Interesting. I'll come back to ask you a few questions, especially on the SME side, how you help them, because for them to access such funds, it means that they have to go through some reporting, some strategy to really show what they are doing. That, but I'll come back to you on that. Now, I guess my audience will be saying that this is a boys' school, so we are not ESG compliant. But for those of you, who came here quite early, you realize that we started the whole program with gender diversity by having Abena, who is the CEO for the GSC, who is also ESG, to speak to us. So Abena, just to make sure that we are inclusive, I want to find out from you in terms of the manual that we have by the GSC. How are we ensuring that businesses are very inclusive and ensuring that the issue of gender diversity is very important and really championed at every business? And I'll just share the KPMG's experience. For us in KPMG, I can say that when you look at our management profile, about 45% of our management team are females. When you also look at the leadership level in terms of partners, 33% of our partners are females. And we are trying to make sure that we move up. Now, when you look at our global board is made up of 11 members, and 40% of that is females. And I think it's a good place to put your hands together for KPMG. We are doing a very good job there. And I want you to tell us what you are doing in terms of making sure that businesses are very inclusive when it comes to the manual that we launched recently. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gordon. And taking that globally, you are quite progressive. Kwame has also promised me that the next panel will not be a manel. There will be equal representation. At the Ghana Stock Exchange, at our executive level, it's 50-50, male-female.
Wow.
At the organizational level, it's 55% female and 45% male. So that's where we are. Wow. We've been working with our listed companies to improve the constitution of their boards and senior management. To that level, we have partnered with the Boardroom Africa because we believe data and benchmarking is very, very important. So over the last 3 years, we've been producing board diversity indices. And what we've realized is that in Ghana, females represent about 27% of the board and the executive level of our listed companies. And we've been working with them to improve that to achieve at least the 40% target. Whilst we are not there yet, we've realized that Ghana is one of the best performing, if not the best performing in Africa. So that's one of the areas we are looking at. Also on the sustainability segments that we launched on the market for our fixed income market, we are looking to issue gender bonds. So included in our GRI or ICM principles, sustainable bond principles, which is what we have adopted, is to focus on raising financing that supports women-led businesses and provide women-led initiatives in gender bonds. And we are partnering with some companies to issue the first gender bonds and link them on the market. It's a process, and we are actively working on that. We've also launched our Ghana Alternative Markets. The GAX market was our solution to support the SME sector, which in Ghana, most of it or a lot of it is women-led businesses or women-owned businesses. And we've had limited success there. And what we've done this year is relook at the GAX market, and we'll be relaunching the GAX market to take into account some of the feedback we have. We've set up what we call a listing support fund. If you need to raise capital and you don't have the money to pay advisors, we will pre-fund the cost of your advisors. And when you raise your capital, you refund it into the fund and carry on with your business. So those are some of the initiatives we are taking. Thank you.
Thank you, Abena. And it will interest you to know that Abena is a walking ESG inclusive person. So this morning, before she came, she actually asked Jerry to come early and then to let us know that she's coming. And I mean, sometimes when you go for these programs and when our women are coming or the men are coming for the, you see they come either men or women. But I'm very happy to see that Abena, came with a gentleman. Let's put our hands together for Abena for that. So before we delve into the question and answer session, I just want to come back to you, John. In terms of supporting our SMEs, you mentioned that you are having a product that will look at the SMEs. Now, even if you look at the bigger institutions, having data on ESG compliance sometimes becomes very difficult. How are we going to ensure that we make things quite simple and quite easy for these SMEs to follow so that they can really get access to this funding or financing that you spoke about? And then after this, we'll zoom into the Q&A session. Thank you.
So how are we doing this? We are not direct to the SMEs. We go through the banks. So we work with the banks to design targeted training to SMEs. So we request our SMEs, our PFIs, to target or identify some potential SMEs who we can handhold and get ready for DBG funding. And we provide a capacity building program whereby we walk them through what are the essentials or the standards, the environmental and social standards under the World Bank, and let them look through their current operations and see if they indeed have a policy and whether they have the right regulatory permits and requirements, let's say the EPA requirements, understanding the requirements under the schedule, and also if they're into food processing, how they are embedding occupational health and safety. And these little things, as you rightly mentioned, is not about the big things. It's about the little things that you do that you want to ensure that your business propel and scale and also be a long-term organization. So one, we do incubator programs with SMEs with our partner PFIs. We also train the PFIs themselves. We have working sessions with them, trying to let them appreciate how they could scale the current robust systems that they have. And also lastly is the reporting. We require our PFIs, which is quite, we get a feedback that is a lot of reporting. But we also do a lot of reporting to our development partners. And how do we get the right reporting to tell them that we are actually deploying their capital to these PFIs and also scaling SME. So we've designed a quarterly reporting tool which we walk our PFIs through of how to report some of their efforts and the good and the requirements that they are made to comply. And also being able to identify businesses that are actually scaling, and so that we could be able to provide tailored technical support to them so that they can actually implement and also propel. So,
thank you. So I guess the advisory aspect is very important because we really need to make sure that the people, these businesses are really supported so that it doesn't come like a very strenuous requirement on them.
Yes, and also to add to that, we also have a women's, a gender unit that is meant to also support women-owned and women-led businesses, which oftentimes they engage women-led businesses and train them. Yesterday, there was a session like that whereby they train over about 200 women-owned and led businesses and on how to integrate sustainability into their operations.
Thank you. So before we pick the question, Ernest, I just want you to share with us in terms of the private sector, what you've done, in the sector, the ESG space, and how it has helped you, as a business. Just briefly, then we pick the questions.
So the ESG has actually transformed the way we do business today, from the back office, to HR, to operations on ground. Everything has changed in the sense that we have to now employ new tools, new systems to be able to capture information. We have done a lot of capacity building and making sure that in all facets of operations, we are mindful of the very little things we have to do and also things that we need to capture so that it can also contribute to our reporting, because the tendency for you to ignore certain important things is high. Therefore, once you draw those comprehensive systems and structures, we'll be able to capture that.
Thank you, my audience, for staying engaged. I think the question and answer time is open now. We have just 10 minutes to do this, and so I want you to, the floor is open for 5 questions. We'll pick 3 here, and then we'll pick 2 online. So, Jude, we have 1 person here. So, Jude, maybe you can pick 3 questions at a go, and then we answer them. So, your name and your institution and where you're calling from.
Where I'm calling from. That's
Yes.
interesting. Sounds like a radio station.
Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Theo Ayi, and I work for GCB Bank PLC.
So, you also have a G in your name.
Yes, we have a G. Thank you very much. I picked thank you. This has been a very wonderful panel discussion, and I'm really excited I came. I picked a point around the scope of the G as relating more directly to the E and the S and how it is implemented. One may think that perhaps the governance relates not only to the E and the S, but also to how the entire organism of the institution sets up and cascades its authorities and mandates and decision-making across the entire organization. So much so that if an organization is able to adopt the requirements of the standards for execution and reporting then it may have the flexibility of executing the ESG principles in a way that reflects its size and complexity and skills availability. I want to know what your thoughts are around these points, around the scope of the G, and also the flexibilities that organizations can have around how they implement the ESG. I have a second question, which I don't think I had discussed, around, do you have any thoughts to share around models for quantifying the outcomes of ESG by organizations and communities? Two questions in one. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Jude. I think we'll pick these two, and then we... So, John, do you want to take a go at them first?
Well, thank you. That's a great question. So you've answered the question, basically. The social development aspect is somehow not felt when we talk about ESG. It's mostly, the focus is about the E, environment. But what you're talking about covers the social element, whereby as an institution, in terms of your entire structure, your manpower, what interventions do you do to ensure that there's a right governance structure? Although, yes, the governance itself is a pillar that covers it, the social development, if you have a right manpower plan and a manpower management system, it speaks to that in terms of having anti-bribery corruption policy, making sure that the governance systems are there. If you have these systems already, it's a matter of you setting out the implementation and being able to set the matrices and say that from this benchmark or this reporting requirement, this is where we are, and this is how we want to scale. I think it's not felt well, and these are the things that we need to pronounce. Like rightly you said, someone will say, what has the S got to do? And also as a financial institutions like the commercial banks, the focus has always been, what are my SMEs doing? Are they compliant? But they forget that it also includes yourself, because under the World Bank Performance Standard 2 and even the IFC Performance Standard 2 talks about working and labor conditions. And the question is that, as you, the employee, can you walk up to management and tell them that, hey, when was the last time you did your employee management survey? Because you yourself, I mean, you have concerns. But that comes to the part about the governance part, is that you need to elevate the role to able to have to able to speak to and have a closer leaning to the CEO, so that you can cascade these sensitive information to management when it's required. And also to add to that, the governance indirectly, because currently in the financial sector, you have your corporate governance system that is being managed by Bank of Ghana. You also infer that you also have to set systems to ensure that reputational risk concerning corporate governance issues are addressed, and also responsible businesses. That comes to another governance. Are you financing businesses in Galamsey, or are you financing businesses that deteriorate the environment? You need to have these things covered in your governance approach, because the bottom line is, where is the money going? Where are you funding most? Are you financing businesses that destroy the environment, or encouraging businesses that are not including women or underserving certain kind of segment of people? So again, back to the question that you answered, which I said you answered, is that it has to have an entire governance approach, which I believe is something that it appears to be missing, and it's more focused on how are we screening and how we managing this. But the institution itself has to have these systems. And another part is that you could have a system, but have you audited your systems? Have you engaged your internal auditor to test whether indeed the commitments that you've made under those ESG policies that you have, are you fulfilling them? And also, where have you gotten to? Can you benchmark against various standards that are out there, like the IFC performance standards, the World Bank performance standards, or any development partner that is leaning to you? Or again, you have the sustainable banking principles, which has great standards that are out there and also guidance notes. Have you looked through your credits and identify whether your credit team actually internalize this principle in your credit portfolio? You go to banks, they say they are doing it, but when you ask them to give you the credit paper and you see that they are just checking a box, they are documenting your EPA, but are they understanding what is the EPA schedule saying? Banks would, and I think it's not there, it's time that we need to scale and also build capacity and also see how we can help banks to do this better. As against the focus is more of how we managing financial performance. There is a non-financial performance which has a huge materiality impact. You could get away with financial, but with non-financial, it can explode at any point, and also had issues with non-performing loans.
Thank you, John. That's quite interesting. In terms of quantifying it, I mean, he asked another question in terms of quantifying some of these things. Ernest,
Yes.
what would be your reaction to that?
Yeah, so just to still link to what Kwabena mentioned, it's always important to look at the key material issues when it comes to governance and social in the operations. Typically, if I use the cocoa industry as an example, we are looking at your entire supply chain. So you are dealing with farmer groups, you have women groups. So to what extent are you engaging these groups? What are the representation of women on the leadership of these groups? So this becomes very material to our business because then we want to ensure that any investment of money, pre-financing we push in the bush, we have a clear representation of women participating in the process. And when women are part of a process, there's transparency and clarity, just to put in quote. So it's more linked to your business, your operations, and the material issues you are dealing with, to be able to define the KPIs that will have direct impact on your business and also be able to unlock other opportunities for the business.
Thank you very much. So in the interest of time, we'll cut the questions for the room, but we have one question. I want to pick one question from the online platform. The question is, with respect to reducing, I'm sure it's coming to you, with respect to reducing carbon emissions, do we intend to introduce some form of a carbon tax in Ghana? Are we getting there soon? And just in 30 seconds.
Hello. Okay, thank you for your question. Okay, so before we came up with a carbon market framework I spoke about, we did an assessment in Ghana to see the best carbon pricing instrument that we could adopt to pay for the social cost of emissions. So we looked at 3 options. We looked at the international crediting scheme, which framework looks at, and then we look at the carbon tax or the emission trading scheme, which both are under what we call domestic obligation. And in terms of looking at the assessment, the outcome of the assessment was intriguing. One is the fact that the high emitters in Ghana are heavily taxed. And also the current financial infrastructure or regulation system that exists also provides us the opportunity to adopt the carbon tax and the emission trading scheme. But because of the fact that all these institutions are heavily taxed, we would face political risk in implementing a carbon tax or an ETS. So we adopted the international crediting scheme or the carbon crediting mechanism, where any entity that implements any form of green business that leads to emission reduction or mitigation activity, then you are able to actually create what we call a carbon asset. And simply put, a carbon asset is any emission or any outcome that results from either reducing, avoiding, or removing greenhouse gas from the atmosphere. And then you price it, you measure it, and then you trade it. And so simply, that is why we could not implement the carbon tax. But eventually, maybe government over time may introduce that, depending on the economic atmosphere that we may have then. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so just before we leave the stage, I would just want to take your closing thoughts in 5 seconds. starting with Ernest, 5 seconds, and then so 2 seconds already gone.
Yes. So I would say ESG is key and critical, and that all companies should look at making it mandate to integrate in it, and making also material more important to the company by catalyzing the needed benefit the company can get to.
Thank you. That's awesome. John?
So
3 seconds.
I believe the financial sector has more to do. We are here to help them grow together. We are here to also provide that additionality and that intervention for them to scale, and also be in a good position to mobilize climate financing so that we can do more with the capital that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Mr. Lamte.
Thank you. So for us, we see private sector as an engine of growth. And so what we have done in terms of introducing the carbon market framework in Ghana is to create the needed attention in Ghana for carbon assets. And so we appeal to any business, anyone seeking to actually implement any green business idea, approach us. We're happy to help you convert that into a concept and raise finance to support or implement and achieve your business, green business. So thank you.
Thank you. I believe we've had an engaging and exciting time. Just put your hands together for my panelists. And thank you very much for making it for today. I wish we could take all the questions, but just to say that let's keep engaging. If you have more questions, we'll pick them up and then we'll respond to them and send them back to you. In terms of, what we have been doing in KPMG, we have a report we call the Big Shift, the Small Steps. And that is a report that talks about how we've analyzed about 5,800 companies globally and reporting on what they've done on ESG. So that report is also available. We'll share with you after this program. So make sure that you leave your contact with us and then we'll share with you. So thank you very much, my panelists, for joining us today. It's a pleasure to share the stage with you. Thank you. Jude.
Thank you very much. As the panel comes off the stage, there's a video to be played before. Oh, my apologies. There's a photo to be taken on stage. So let's have that, and then the video will roll for us to introduce our closing remarks speaker. Okay, a round of applause for them as they come off, and let the video roll.